The comment was made at a dinner table in New Jersey. It was the spring of 1992, and Bruce Springsteen was sitting with a small group of people he trusted. His manager, a journalist he had known for 15 years, a producer who had worked on two of his records. The kind of dinner that happened in the gaps between tours, informal enough that the conversation could go places it wouldn't go in public. Someone, the journalist probably, mentioned Nirvana. The album had been out for 7 months. It had done what everyone now knew it had done, displaced everything around it, rewritten the terms of what rock music looked like commercially and culturally, handed a generation something to hold on to in a way that made the previous thing feel suddenly and irreversibly distant. "You know what they're really doing," the journalist said. "It's your thing, the working class voice, the anger underneath the surface, the sense that somebody's saying something true about what it feels like to be a certain kind of person in America. That's Springsteen. They just plugged it into a different amp." Bruce Springsteen was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous reading," he said. "It's an accurate reading." Bruce set down his fork. He was 42 years old and had been making records about the American interior for 20 years. The frustration and the longing and the beauty that lived inside ordinary lives that the culture did not always bother to see. He had built a career on the specificity of that project. He did not think of it as a style. He thought of it as an attempt. "I should listen properly," he said, not to the journalist, to himself mostly. He had heard Nevermind. Everyone had heard Nevermind. But hearing something and listening to it were different things, and he knew the difference. And he had not yet listened. He did that week. He listened to Nevermind alone, in the small room in his house where he kept his records and a decent pair of speakers and a chair that faced the wall rather than a window. Because windows gave you somewhere to look, and he preferred not to have somewhere to look when he was listening seriously. He listened straight through, without stopping. The first thing he noticed was the melody, not the noise. He had expected the noise, had braced for it slightly in the way you brace for something louder than you prefer. But underneath the noise, the melodies were doing something specific that he had not anticipated. They were not angry. The production was angry. The drums were angry. The guitar was angry in the particular way that guitars are angry when they are being asked to carry something that words cannot hold. But the melodies were something else. They were almost plaintive. They moved like something that wanted resolution and knew it wasn't coming. He knew that feeling. He had written toward it for 20 years. The second thing he noticed was the voice. He had a relationship with voices, had spent his career developing one, had thought carefully and extensively about what a voice was supposed to do, how it was supposed to carry what the words alone couldn't carry. He knew the difference between a voice that was performing emotion and a voice that was transmitting it. The transmission was rarer. Most voices performed, even very good voices performed, most of the time. The performance was necessary, was part of the craft, and he did not dismiss it. But Kurt Cobain's voice was not performing. It was doing something else, something closer to what happened in the room at the end of a long night when the performance was over and the only thing left was the actual person with the actual feeling and nowhere to put it except into the microphone. The voice sounded like it had been used, like it had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was no longer pretending the weight was manageable. Bruce sat in the chair and listened. When the record ended, he sat for a while in the quiet. Then he got up and played it again from the beginning. The journalist's comment had lodged somewhere he couldn't quite reach. "It's your thing, the working class voice, the anger underneath the surface." He turned this over in the following days. Not defensively. He was not a defensive person about his music, had learned long ago that defensiveness was a way of closing off the questions that were actually worth asking. He turned it over the way you turn over something that might be true and that you want to understand properly before you decide what to do with it. There was something in the comparison that was right. He could hear it now that he had listened properly. The specificity of the feeling, the sense of being caught inside a life that was bigger than the language available to describe it, the frustration that had no clean political object, the longing that didn't know quite what it was longing for. He had written about that. He had made a career of that. And there was something in Nevermind that was reaching for the same territory. But the method was different. His method was accumulation, the detail, The name street, the specific car, the woman with the particular name doing the particular thing at the particular time of day. He built the interior life by assembling the exterior with enough precision that the interior became visible through the gaps. It was a patient method. It required the listener to come with him, to follow the accumulation, to trust that the detail was going somewhere. What Kurt Cobain was doing was not that. There was no accumulation. There was no exterior assembled with care. There was just the feeling, delivered directly, without the architecture. And the feeling was real. He could hear that it was real. And it was reaching people in a way that his own method, for all its precision, could not always reach. He needed to see it live. He understood this with the particular certainty that came when he was about to do something that would cost him something. Not financially, something else. The certainty that he was going to go somewhere and hear something and not be entirely comfortable with what he found. He booked a flight to Seattle. He told almost no one. His manager knew. One other person. He flew out on a Thursday in late September 1992 and checked into a hotel under a name that was not his name and spent the afternoon walking around a city he had been to twice before and had not thought about in the years between. Nirvana was playing that evening at the Seattle Center Coliseum. Not a small show. This was the In Utero tour, the arena circuit, 20,000 people. He had a ticket in a section far enough from the stage that he would not be immediately recognized. He wore a cap. He sat in the seat. The lights went down. He had been to thousands of concerts. He had played thousands of concerts. He knew every register of what a crowd sounded like when something was happening that it had been waiting for. The specific quality of the collective anticipation, the intake of breath, the moment before the first sound when 20,000 people became a single thing. He knew all of this. The crowd at Seattle that night had it. The thing he recognized, the specific quality. He leaned forward slightly in his seat. Kurt came out without ceremony. No long intro. No stage production designed to build the anticipation to a breaking point. He walked out with the band, plugged in, and played. Bruce watched from the middle distance and tried not to categorize what he was seeing. He had a tendency to categorize, had built a sophisticated analytical apparatus over 20 years of thinking about music and performance, and the apparatus was useful and also, sometimes, a way of keeping experience at arm's length. He tried to set it aside. The first song hit harder than he expected. Not louder. He had expected loud, but harder in the specific sense of impact. The way something lands when it is aimed precisely at the part of you that was not braced for it. The crowd was moving. Not the choreographed movement of a pop concert, not the performed abandon of people who had decided in advance to perform abandon. Real movement. The kind that happens when a body is receiving something it recognizes. Bruce watched the bodies move, and he watched Kurt on the stage, and he thought about the journalist's comment, and he thought about his own shows and the particular relationship he had built with audiences over 2 decades, the intimacy of it, the way he had learned to find the person in the back of the arena and make them feel found. Kurt was not doing that. Kurt was not looking for anyone. He was standing on the stage with the guitar and the words and the sound, and he was not performing connection. He was simply being there, and the connection was happening anyway, without effort or design. The way connection happens when what is being offered is genuine enough that it requires no supplementary work. The gap between them, Bruce thought, was not skill or intention. It was generation. It was the specific weight that this generation carried, the particular shape of their frustration, and the way Kurt Cobain had found the exact sound for that weight. He had found the sound. That was the gift. Bruce had found his own sound 30 years ago in the bars of New Jersey, playing for people who needed something named that they couldn't name themselves. He remembered what that felt like, the first times it worked, the sense that the music was doing something necessary, something that mattered beyond entertainment, something that was actually of use to the people in the room. What he was watching was that, the same essential thing, in a different room, in a different register, aimed at a different weight. He sat in the seat and watched until the last song ended. On the flight back to New Jersey the following morning, he took out a small notebook he carried for exactly this kind of moment. The moments when something had happened that he needed to catch before it dissolved back into the general noise of experience. He wrote for most of the flight, not about Kurt Cobain specifically, not about Nirvana or grunge or the state of rock music. He wrote about the thing he had seen, the particular relationship between a performer and a crowd when what is being offered is genuinely necessary. He wrote about the way that relationship had its own physics, its own logic, that could not be manufactured or replicated by technique alone. You had to have the thing first. The technique was how you got it to the people. He wrote about what he had heard in the voice, the weight of it, the unstageable quality of it, the sense of genuine cost. He wrote about what it made him think about his own voice, about the particular habits of 20 years, about the places where craft had perhaps smoothed something that should not have been smooth. He filled 6 pages. At the bottom of the 6th page, he wrote a single line and underlined it. He did not share the notebook for years. When he finally showed it to his manager in 2010, during a conversation about a documentary project, the manager read the 6 pages and asked about the underlined line. Bruce told him what it said. He found the sound for his people, Bruce said. I found mine in 1973. I watched him and remembered what it felt like when I found it. That's what I wrote down. The manager asked if he had ever considered reaching out to Kurt. Bruce was quiet for a moment. He died 18 months later, he said. I thought about it. I didn't do it. I've thought about that. He looked at the notebook. What would I have said? We're doing the same thing. Different amp, same frequency. You should keep going. He paused. I think he would have understood that. The notebook stayed in a drawer for years after that. The pages filled on the flight from Seattle became part of something larger. A longer document Bruce had been assembling since the early 90s. Observations about music and performance and what it meant to do this work over a long period, to keep finding reasons to keep going. The Seattle pages were near the beginning of that document. He returned to them occasionally, not to the specific sentences, but to the feeling they represented. The specific clarity that had arrived at 30,000 feet on a Friday morning in the autumn of 1992, when something he had seen the night before was still alive enough that he could catch it in 6 pages before it dissolved. He had gone to Seattle to see if the comparison was accurate. It was accurate. He had gone with mild resistance. The mild resistance of someone who has been doing something for a long time and does not particularly want to be told that someone else is doing a version of it better or differently. He had left with something he had not expected. Not discomfort, not the competitive unease that could have accompanied the recognition, but something closer to relief. The thing worked, in someone else's hands in a different decade, aimed at a different frequency. It worked. The essential project was not exhausted. It could still find its way to the people who needed it. That was the thing worth knowing. That was what the 6 pages said in the end, when you distilled them down to the sentence that mattered. The sound finds its people. It always finds its people. You go to see for yourself when you're not sure you can trust what you've been told. And sometimes what you find confirms what you expected, and sometimes it confuses what you expected, and sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, it reminds you why you started. Bruce Springsteen flew to Seattle to check a journalist's claim and came back with 6 pages and a line he underlined. The line was not about Kurt Cobain. It was about the work. It is always finally about the work.